Welcome to the International Recruiting course. We have our first class today. Today we are going to explore what it is, how it is different, how it is similar, what to prepare for, and what challenges await us here, and what might help. That is what we will be covering in our session today. I will tell you about this course. This is a new course being launched at the Academy. Currently, the company is trying to expand globally, opening new offices and locations. You are asked to help with this. You are Charlie, you are a recruiter, but often, for many people, a new market or country means difficulties, language barriers, cultural differences, lack of understanding how to do it, and maybe even fear. And in the end, the company does not achieve its goals. That is not good. Therefore, for modern recruiters, knowledge of international recruiting is now a requirement that companies have for them because the world is becoming increasingly global. The company has more and more people starting to be in different countries, and these people need to be hired, found, and recruited. So it is time for recruiters to learn international recruiting. As for the course itself, what it will provide is the ability to source vacancies in any country. This always increases the value of someone who knows how to do it. And international recruiters can easily earn 2 or 3 times more than regular recruiters who do not know how to do this. So, basically, it is a worthwhile investment in yourself. This is the course website. This is what it looks like, and I will tell you about myself, primarily about my international recruiting experience. My name is Mike Pritula. I started my career at Alpha Bank. Now it is with Bancorp. At Alpha Bank, my introduction to not yet international recruiting but international employees began when I was transferred to the head office. I first worked in a branch, recruiting and training credit specialists, and I had good results. I was transferred to the main office. I started looking for candidates for the main office. And one of my clients, Hanif Yunus, turned out to be a foreigner, and it was my first experience working with a foreigner. I had requests from him. I participated in meetings with him. It was a different culture, a different approach, and I found it incredibly interesting and unusual. Then the bank hired a Polish guy, Checo. We were looking for candidates for Checo. I was searching for candidates, but it was all local search, for now. Then I moved to the STA TV channel, and at Alpha Bank I forgot to mention my first international recruiting experience was in 2007 or 2008. I don't remember exactly. Alpha Bank bought some Belarusian bank and opened Alpha Bank Belarus based on this Belarusian bank, and I received a request for a chief accountant position. Since I was responsible for the operations block, I started looking for a chief accountant for this bank in Belarus. And it was a new experience for me. First, I didn't know which job sites were relevant. I started researching job sites. Secondly, I quickly realized that there was very specific legislation there. An employee under certain types of contracts couldn't leave until the contract ended. That is, employees didn't actually have the right to quit. They had to work until the end of the contract. Having to make international calls was also a challenge. But I found opportunities, made some contacts there, and started calling to communicate. I was perceived as some random person calling from another country, and they wondered why I was calling. Who was this guy anyway? In general, there were difficulties, but we eventually found candidates. I found about 5 candidates, and they hired some of them. The only simple thing about it all was that we had one common language. I didn't need to switch to English. At Starlight Media on the STP TV channel, we didn't have much international search. In Bargaming, an international team appeared with many international colleagues and employees, one way or another. But I wasn't in recruiting, so I wasn't directly involved in that. However, I participated in interviews, searched for a couple of candidates, and interacted with many foreigners. Because we had about 15 offices. One of my supervisors was a foreigner, a Frenchman. Overall, it was a good international experience. But in VODE, we fully engaged with the team in searching for foreigners. In PL, we were looking in Korea when our team won a grant and went to Korea to look for an assistant there. And I learned, again, things that were new to me. For example, it's impossible to post a job opening in Korea. If there's no registration, as is now the case in many countries on job sites, you have to show that you're not just a user, but that you have some kind of company. And there were many local nuances about Korea that I learned from my colleagues. For example, in Korea, it's very common to ask people how much they can drink or if you drink a lot or a little. If you drink little, it's considered bad. Because there's a lot of drinking in Korea, including at work and after work, and it's one of their requirements. You should be able to drink properly. Plus, we were looking for people in Berlin. We searched for people across Europe, in the USA, and worked with recruitment agencies. It was all interesting and unique, and we also recruited expats to the main office in Kyiv. That was also interesting and an unusual new experience. And we had offices in different countries too. We were recruiting sales executives in the US. We were looking for people in China, and we had people in an office in Brazil, so there was international recruiting as well. And that's interesting too. So there you have it. Today I'm going to share the main points about international recruiting that you need to know to be able to do it. What I'd like to convey today, and what I want to convince you of, is that overall it's not difficult. I guess there's only one challenge I thought of. There are probably tools available already, but it doesn't yet solve language barriers. That is, if you don't speak any foreign language, English, or the language of the country where you're recruiting, it will be difficult for you. It might still be possible, but it's complicated, more complicated than usual. If you have conversational English, at least for international recruiting, it's enough to be good at asking questions and understanding answers. Again, there are tools to help analyze everything. So in general, if you have intermediate English, it's already easier. Anyway, let's go through this step by step. Let's talk about it one by one. The work relies on best practices, a list of what I recommend keeping track of. And I would appreciate if you could write what you do, whether you are a recruiter or what your role is. Please write carefully and share some information about yourself. This course, like all courses, has homework. We have an open class today. And the homework is relatively simple, but then we have 5 classes about different continents and regions, and you will need to find candidates. So you will need to test all this out, try it, and for completing the homework, you can receive our International Recruiter Diploma. We issue the diploma on the Credible online platform, where other companies also issue their diplomas. Course syllabus. Today we are introducing the main differences and features, and then we will go through different regions. North America, Europe, Asia, Latin America, Africa, Middle East. So, Daria writes that she works in a Spanish company that has branches in the Netherlands, Portugal, and Germany. Okay, that is easier for you. So it is within one continent, all right? Today's agenda, but I will not read it out. There are many nuances, we will just go through all these points now. So, the goals of international recruiting. Why does a company or business need international recruiting in the first place? First, it allows access to remote employees who can be hired from all over the world. For example, accessing expertise that is new to you or someone with a new language. That is, a company may need to find a person who is not in your country, so you have to look in countries where people have expertise in that particular area. Sometimes it is simply expanding geographical reach. That happens. Oh, by the way, I forgot. On STB TV channel, my recruiters went to Belarus to hire. I had forgotten about that fact. This relates to this point. For example, we were hiring so many people that we did not have enough in Kyiv. Or recruiters first traveled to different cities across Ukraine. And then, when we realized there was a suitable candidate in Minsk, Belarus, we had Dmitry Tonkovich working for us at that time, I think. A few other guys too. And maybe he was the one who advised that there were many talented TV professionals in Minsk. They don't have very high salaries and are interested in relocating, so go there and talk to them. So my recruiters even traveled then in search of candidates. This was around 2010, 2011, I think 2012. So it happens that, for example, Wargaming, where I worked, had a situation where the company was growing so fast, with 2,000 employees, that the local market couldn't keep up. There were several tasks being solved at once, including expertise. That is, the company understood that they needed to look for people in Minsk from different countries. Because Minsk didn't have enough people with all the needed skills, so they brought some from Europe, some from Ukraine, some from other countries. Sometimes a company opens an office in another country for various reasons. Sometimes a company opens a representative office to sell in that country. Sometimes a company opens a representative office like Preply, for example. The company was considering different locations, looking at San Francisco, Berlin, and Barcelona, 3 such international IT specialist hubs, decided that Berlin would be the most optimal in terms of salary. So they decided to open an office in Berlin, hire a couple of people. Yes, it was possible to form a team there because certain specialties are better developed there than in Ukraine. Some companies will have examples now, hire in other countries to improve their diversity. Some companies, by the way, hire and bring people to their own country. We had that in Apple too. We had foreigners from different countries so that we would be internally diverse and better understand our customers and work with different countries. So we worked then, for example, with the AISEC organization. It's a student leadership organization for developing young leaders. They have an internship program. You can make arrangements with them. They post your job opening on their internal resources. Those interested in paid internships respond. AISEC helps bring these people in, arrange visas, settle them, and provide accommodation. You take them on as interns and pay about $506, plus you pay AISEC for their services. Sometimes you need to open a representative office in another country like a sales office, or it could just be a legal entity. Internal recruitment outsourcing happens. This is when a large global company realizes it's more cost-effective to keep one recruiting team in one country, so they form a single team that handles vacancies worldwide. This can also be considered international recruiting. So instead of having local recruiters in each country, the company decides it's better to centralize. That's when international recruiting comes into play for the recruiter. And nowadays, companies are interested in finding, these are current cases. There's a huge migration from Ukraine in particular, and companies are interested in finding Ukrainians in different countries, either to collaborate with them or to hire them in some country. So that's also a form of international recruiting to some degree. These are examples of goals and objectives for international recruiting. Individual companies may have other specific objectives they want to achieve. Here are more examples of well-known companies. One of the expansion options is talent pooling. Companies pursue international recruiting to access a wide range of qualifications and unique skills that are rarely found in the domestic market. For example, tech giants like Google and Microsoft actively recruit professionals from around the world to work on cutting-edge projects in artificial intelligence and machine learning. Improving innovation capacity. Employees from different cultures bring diverse approaches and perspectives that contribute to generating innovative ideas. This can be seen in the case of Apple, which utilizes international talent to create products that meet the needs of different markets or to strengthen its global presence. Having international employees helps companies better understand and adapt to the peculiarities of different regions, improving marketing and sales. For example, a well-known company successfully adapts its clothing collections to the cultural and fashion preferences of different countries, precisely because of its international team of designers. These are the kinds of cases we see, understanding the different outcomes in recruiting across countries. International recruiting actually has a lot in common with regular recruiting. So globally, I would say that international recruiting is just normal recruiting. There are just a lot of nuances that need to be considered, and it's advisable to know them to avoid making mistakes. The hiring goals are the same, attracting qualified professionals. The use of technology is present in all countries too. They may be different. For example, we use LinkedIn, which is popular worldwide, but in Poland it would be Golden Line, and in Germany it would be Xing. It just so happens that those social networks are more popular there. The key stages of selection are also in principle the same. Reviewing resumes, interviewing, checking references, maybe some kind of test assignment, but there can be nuances and additional steps. I'll tell you in a moment which simplify the process. These are the nuances. The conclusion I'd like us to make and remember is this. International recruiting is the same as regular recruiting, just with a number of specific features. I compare it to other specialized forms of recruiting. It has similar features to, for example, mass recruiting. So if you're doing mass hiring, which is when you're hiring 50 to 100 people for similar positions, there are nuances there too. There are specific platforms, technologies, and types of people, and this also requires study. Or, for example, if you're hiring IT professionals, those who have moved from conventional recruiting to IT recruiting have also studied many of its peculiarities and nuances, but they learned them. Or hiring a top manager. It's also different from regular hiring. That's hiring too. It's similar, but there are nuances. International recruiting is a variation, just like mass IT or executive recruiting. And all the features of international recruiting can be learned, allowing you to successfully fill vacancies. What are the main features? Cultural sensitivity is the most underrated aspect. Having worked in various international companies with representatives from different cultures, I've seen and experienced firsthand how often I perceive things differently based on my own culture. It took me a while, but I basically realized right away that people from other cultures are different. It was interesting to me. In 2006, when I was a recruiter, I met Hanif. He was Pakistani, I think. It was unfamiliar to me, a different person, different approaches. This was my first experience working with expats. And in 2015, I believe, our entire company started getting training from Aaron Meyer, the author of the book The Culture Map. I'll recommend this book at the end of the class. I believe that all international recruiters should read this book. It's translated into Russian and Ukrainian, and the original is in English. Because cultural differences are something you will encounter. And if you don't understand them, you'll even misjudge candidates' soft skills and misinterpret behavior. Worst of all, you'll communicate with them incorrectly, approach them wrongly, and you'll be misunderstood and ignored. Here's an example. In Japan, great importance is placed on age and experience in the same company. While in the US, the emphasis is on diversity and job changes, indicating flexibility and adaptability. In the US, however, the emphasis is on diversity and job changes, indicating flexibility and adaptability. By the way, you may have heard that in Silicon Valley, they're now repealing the non-compete agreements, recognizing them as illegitimate in order to promote innovation. That is, they want employees in the US to actively move from one startup to another. This supports the transfer and development of innovation. In Japan, on the other hand, frequently changing jobs is viewed negatively. You see? In Scandinavia, by the way, Daria mentioned Holland. This must be from your experience, right? Well, in my experience and from my students, I have a student from Holland. She shared her struggles with a lot of homework. She's Ukrainian but worked in Holland and complained about work-life balance. In Scandinavia, work-life balance is important. Candidates often evaluate potential employers in terms of corporate culture and social responsibility. Then there are the legal aspects. When recruiting in different countries, you'll encounter various aspects. I mentioned that when I was looking for a chief accountant in Belarus, in Minsk, I found that some had annual contracts. There were certain forms of labor relations. Not everyone had this, but many did. Many people told me, I can't leave before my year is up. How can you not? For us, it was normal, and we were offering several times more money. When we started hiring in Germany, we found out that there's a notice period of 2 months. That means an employee must give 2 months' notice that they want to leave the company. The company has the right not to let them go earlier, unlike our 2 weeks' notice. These legal aspects need to be taken into account. Plus, there's GDPR. Regarding EU countries, it requires companies to respect confidentiality and grant the right to be forgotten. It's best to use a GDPR-compliant application system here, because you might run into someone who's a stickler for rules. In the US, the focus is on equal opportunity and the prohibition of age discrimination, which is regulated by government agencies. Search and recruitment strategies can vary too. In recruiting, we have a huge set of search tools, lots of channels, a lot of resources, but there can be nuances from country to country. For example, in the US and Europe, the emphasis is on directly approaching potential candidates through social media. That is, it's possible to write on LinkedIn. That's normal. In Asia, connections, references, and business reputation matter more. When I first became acquainted with Kazakhstan, and this was largely due to teaching, it was 2016 when I started getting more and more students. Then I went there 5 times, and I learned that in Kazakhstan, for example, people very often look for jobs through acquaintances. That is, primarily through recommendations, not only in Kazakhstan, but also students from Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. These personal connections. Even students have come to me and continue to come to me by recommendation. It was more important to them if someone recommended it. In Latin American countries, local job search resources such as Bumeran or Catho are often used, adapted to regional market characteristics. So, yeah, when you're looking for candidates in other countries, you need to understand what local resources are available. You need to be able to find them, analyze them, choose them, and work with them. Next, the main challenges of international recruiting. When you first start international recruiting, like when I did it and then my team did, here's what you might run into. And this is something that you probably won't read about in books somewhere. Candidates don't take it seriously when foreigners write to them. That's a fact. I think in your feed too. When people from other countries write to you in another language, something incomprehensible, I mean, you can read it, but you'll tend to ignore it. People are more used to local recruiters writing to them. Any foreign recruiter who has some sort of obscure name, and the name will be obscure to the foreigner on the other side too. A profile in an unfamiliar language, some unfamiliar cities and countries, it's a foreigner. Plus, candidates prefer to communicate in their own language, if we're talking about the majority. There are, I'll talk about this later, so-called international candidates who understand that there are international recruiters. They have already worked for international companies. It's normal for them to communicate in English, but it's a small fraction of candidates who have this international mindset. Most people don't have that. This is something you often don't think about. A foreign, unknown company to them, especially if you are writing from a less developed country in the candidate's opinion. When we, for example, were recruiting from Ukraine to the United States, for Americans, Ukraine, they don't even know where it is on the map. Well, most Americans. Of course, if you're writing from America to any country will realize that writing from the USA means cool, big salaries. So, a foreign unknown company doesn't look like the most preferable place to work for a candidate. And sometimes if you're recruiting from Kiev to the US, there's also a time difference. For example, my recruiters had to work evenings and nights to interview candidates. Then, thankfully, one recruiter went on vacation to the US for 2 months. We agreed that she would work for 1 month and rest for 1 month. And she was calling candidates from there. She already had a local number. We'll also talk about the importance of these details. And she was telling candidates, I'm here in this city right now. Things became much warmer, and we eventually found candidates. To put you in the candidate's shoes, here's what I've outlined for you. Imagine that for your job opening in your city, you receive a resume from a candidate. Choose a country that's very far from you. India, China, Nigeria. It's all written in English, far from perfect. The resume is formatted very differently from what you're used to. That's your reaction. And what questions do you have? You'll think, yeah, some random person sent this, it's unclear. You'll wonder where this person is located and how they'll get here. Why did they send it? What language will I use to communicate with them? How? Where's the first name? Where's the last name? Often when foreigners write, even this is unclear. Sometimes I'm completely misunderstood. They don't attach photos there. It's often not customary for them. It's just 2 words and it's unclear if it's a man or a woman. Well, there are many questions. Solutions. In international recruiting, you either need to look for candidates who are familiar with international recruiting, and none of this will be strange to them. I call them international candidates. They've encountered this before, they've been in different countries, they've already worked for foreign companies. And you need to change yourself. That is, adapt to the local market as much as possible to appear typical in the eyes of the candidate. Even to the point of changing your first and last name. Here's an example. When I started working in gaming, we had Mike Belton there. Mike Belton and Michaelton. Just an unfamiliar name and surname for a Belarusian. Strange. Interesting. Then I found out that Mike Belton is actually Nikolai Beshenets, and Mike Belton is the name adopted for foreign press. He was a PR manager who communicated with foreign journalists. This was, from around 2005 to 2015, a stage of company establishment and growth, with lots of business trips and everything. So he changed his name on social media, in emails, everywhere he introduced himself differently to be more understandable to the Western press. This is what you'll have to do in international recruiting, in some cases. What do you need to show a candidate in international recruiting? That you're one of them, not some alien who's just written somewhere or called or sent an email, wanting something incomprehensible, looking like spam or even a scam. You must show that you understand the local cultural specifics. For example, when we were recruiting in Germany, we had a German in our company, and we included him in communications with candidates so he could talk to them. By the way, what region are you from? Oh, I'm from that one. And they would talk about something familiar so the candidate understands we're not just some company from Ukraine. But we have a German in our company, and he's also from a neighboring region. And in general, he works here, and he hasn't been eaten or taken apart. The candidate needs to clearly understand how communication will take place, in what language, in what format. The next step should be clear to them, the company should be understandable. You should become as clear as possible to them. What helps you in international recruiting? To solve these challenges, first, find a representative of the country to communicate with, to show your text. For example, when we were looking for people in some countries, we tried to find people from these countries in our company and asked them, look, is this written normally for your country, for your language? Does it look adequate? The first contact should preferably be made in the candidate's language. I see many foreigners doing this now when they write to Ukrainians, they write in Ukrainian. Nowadays, this is easily done with a translator. You write in the candidate's language, the candidate responds, you translate it to your language, and then you can offer to switch to English. You can say you used a translator and suggest continuing in English, but the first contact should be as warm as possible in the candidate's language. Prepare the company's media kit. I'll show you what that is. It's advisable to have a local phone number on an IP phone if you plan to call candidates so they see a local call. Plan for the candidate to visit your country. For example, at Pile, when we hired people in Germany, we invited everyone we hired in the end, 4 or 5 people at the start. We asked everyone to come to Kiev, spend time with us so they could see us. You can actually offer to work through freelancing. That's how we hired 2 people in Germany. They worked with us as freelancers, we paid them for 2 months. They saw that we pay money, we're a normal company, we have normal communication, then we transitioned to permanent employment. A great idea is to send a recruiter on a business trip to the hiring country. That would work well too. So I would seriously consider that as well. And leveraging local contacts. You may have partners, employees, former employees, or acquaintances of employees in your target country. That means connecting them as much as possible for advice, understanding, communication, and maybe even conducting introductory interviews so candidates feel it's all local. Media. You can record a video for the candidate talking about the job to add a personal touch and show you're not just some spammer. And you can prepare detailed information about the company, all your social media, articles, basically show that there's a lot of information about you online and you're not some unknown entity. The main stages and principles of international recruiting. International recruiting is essentially the same as regular recruiting. It's just that while local recruiting is generally demanding, international recruiting is even more so. This means your recruiting processes for international hiring need to be even more refined too. International recruiting adds additional challenges, so any internal shortcomings shouldn't complicate an already complex process. So I'm adding a recruiting system audit checklist here for you to make sure you have everything in place. Because if you don't have a job offer, it will affect local recruiting as well. But for international recruiting, the lack of an offer is inexcusable. You must give people a job offer. Well, there's a lot that goes into this. The same applies. You need to build the perfect recruiting process. You should have everything clearly laid out. What happens when, what steps, what processes, what documents, structured interviews. Yes, in this course we don't focus on general recruiting processes, we focus on the specifics of international search. But that means your standard local recruiting should work like clockwork. That's why there's a checklist. That's why you need a perfect process. That's why hiring planning through the recruitment funnel, effort planning, working with numbers, all of this should be in place. Checklist, recruiter knowledge assessments. Recruiters who will be doing international recruiting need to be well versed. They should already know sourcing because it's important in international recruiting. Different search channels, how to write texts and emails, they should be well developed in these areas too. So these are standard tools. Let's call them the tools of ideal recruiting. They should be implemented and realized in the company. Next, what else is different? When an international vacancy arises, you need to clearly answer the question of what languages and at what proficiency levels are needed. That is, first of all, English as a universal language if you're not looking for a native English speaker. Often companies look for people who have knowledge of the local language as a desired advantage. For example, if a company from Ukraine opens a branch office somewhere in Poland, it might look for a person with English and basic Ukrainian at least, while Polish would be assumed by default. Consider what international work experience is required. The fact that you're looking for a foreigner also implies that working with you will be a challenge, something new for that person too. And if someone has never encountered this before, it can be difficult, because working in your own country with your own countrymen is one thing, and working with foreigners is another. So you might even specify a level of cross-cultural understanding. That is, consider to what extent people should be able to account for cultural differences. Otherwise, if a person doesn't understand cultural differences, it's very easy to quickly get into serious conflicts due to misunderstandings. Decide which country and city you'll be searching for candidates in, and don't forget to research salary levels. That is, if you're looking, you know how often companies say, we want to find someone in the USA, but they don't realize that salaries in the USA are 3 times higher than in Europe and 5 times higher than in Ukraine. So you always need to look. There are standard resources for researching salaries. Here's a collection. It was published somewhere, I don't remember where, on resources like or something. I saved a great list. Next comes selecting a candidate search strategy. Basically, we do the same thing in local searches, but in international recruitment. We don't forget that if the company is large, there are often people inside who can recommend someone. Let's not forget about that. And in large companies, there are even sometimes willing internal candidates. For example, in wargaming, people would periodically move from country to country because they found it interesting. Next, you have external passive search, posting a job on Monster or Indeed or LinkedIn and waiting for responses, or external active search. Look at resume databases, check social media, LinkedIn, and other sites. You can engage international recruitment agencies or local agencies that are willing to search in that country, or you can find someone for outsourcing or freelancing, either through various exchanges like Upwork or companies that provide services, and then hire the person from the company after reviewing the conditions. This is usually not perceived as something negative, but rather as an additional payment. There are different rates from 1 month's salary to 2, 3, 5, or 6 months' salary, but this can also be reasonable. So you find a contractor, you work with them, you work with a specialist, you like them, you read the terms, discuss, and decide you want to hire them directly. Can we take them? How much should we pay for them? And you pay the money. So that's an option too. Communication and instruction features, language barriers. Indeed, mastery of English as a universal language. It's important. You can use it in communication. If you don't have English, you can still search, but it will be more difficult. You can use an intermediary who will communicate. Ask someone, for example, a recruiter who handles the vacancy, but there's another recruiter who interviews the candidate, or the hiring manager conducts the interview. I've seen this too, where a recruiter who can read English but doesn't communicate finds candidates, and the hiring manager interviews. Cultural differences, formality, how to address people, first name, full name, and so on, and technological aspects are worth considering too. In some countries, it might be a messenger app. In the US, you'll have WhatsApp, not Telegram. China will have WeChat, not Telegram. You need to consider that. You'll have to install and use these. Interviewing. It's exactly the same as how we usually conduct structured competency-based interviews, preparing a set of questions. We use all the usual techniques, maybe establishing more rapport, and evaluate candidates based on the competencies we've prepared in advance. Don't forget about cultural differences in communication styles. Here are a few examples. Communication styles, direct or indirect. Levels of formality, attitudes towards time can also vary with some candidates. If a candidate is late, you might think they're not serious, but in some countries, being late for an interview is just a different attitude towards time, and that's the norm. You need to consider all of this. How do we account for cultural differences? First, you should read the book I'll recommend. It's useful to read Aaron Meyer's book and prepare the participants. When onboarding a candidate, It's important to provide cross-cultural training about your country. And in general, when talking to candidates, you need to be aware of cultural differences. Here are some examples from different continents and countries showing how cultures can differ for additional study. Homework options for those already in the course. Either complete the recruitment auditor checklist, assess your level of recruiting knowledge, or create your own media kit for your company similar to what I provided to prepare yourself for communicating with international candidates. Books. Here's that book by Erin Meyer, The Culture Map. It shows through examples how cultures of different countries differ, how to communicate, how to adjust your thinking so you don't judge a person's behavior. It's just their culture. Next, we'll start with North America and continue through other countries to explore how recruiting differs in these countries. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you to everyone who was online with me. I invite you to take this course and see you soon. Bye-bye.